Tell me, Daniel, does that truck come with tetanus shots, or do you charge extra? Bradley Knox said it loudly enough for every executive on the front steps of Hawthorne Industrial Group to hear. The laughter came fast, polished, and effortless, the kind people use when they want the most powerful person in the circle to know they are on his side. I stood beside my 1997 Ford F-250 with one hand resting on the faded blue hood. Rust had gathered around the wheel wells. The driver's side mirror was held steady by a bracket I had fabricated myself 15 years earlier. Against the glass headquarters behind us, surrounded by black sedans and spotless luxury SUVs, the old truck looked like it had taken a wrong turn out of another century. Bradley lifted his champagne glass toward my wife. Lauren, you told us your husband worked around vehicles. I assumed you meant something built after dial-up internet. Another wave of laughter moved through the crowd. I looked at Lauren, waiting for the small gesture married people are supposed to give each other when the room turns unkind. A hand on my arm. A quiet correction. Even a look that said she understood the joke had gone far enough. Instead, she smiled. Not nervously. Not apologetically. She actually smiled. Daniel gets attached to things that should have been replaced years ago, she said. Her voice was light, almost playful, and that made it land harder. The executives laughed again. I felt my truck keys press into my palm, their worn edges familiar against my skin. I did not raise my voice. I did not defend the paint, the rust, or the 28 years that truck had carried on its frame. I just looked at Lauren and asked, "You really think old means worthless?" She glanced toward the company photographer, then adjusted the sleeve of her cream-colored jacket. In business, it usually does. That was the moment something inside me became still. Not angry, not broken, just still. Behind her, a banner stretched across the entrance announcing Hawthorne's future fleet modernization program, the largest transportation investment in the company's history. $48 million. 60 custom commercial vehicles. 5 years of maintenance, logistics software, and operational support. Lauren had spent 9 months helping prepare the deal. She had talked about it over dinner, during phone calls, and on Sunday mornings when she barely looked up from her laptop. She knew every executive attending the launch. She knew every projected savings figure. She knew the color of the stitching selected for the fleet supervisor's seats. But she had never once asked who owned the company building the vehicles. Bradley stepped closer to my Ford and tapped the hood with one finger. Maybe we should keep this thing around as a museum piece. Show the employees what transportation looked like before profits. A few people laughed harder than the joke deserved. Victoria Shaw, Hawthorne CEO, watched from near the entrance with a careful expression. She did not join in, but she did not stop it either. Lauren leaned toward me and lowered her voice. Could you move it behind the building? The new fleet will be arriving any minute, and this is going to be photographed. I looked past her toward the long driveway leading from the highway to the corporate plaza. In the distance, sunlight flashed across something moving beyond the line of trees. Then I heard it. One engine at first. Deep, controlled, steady. Then another. Then dozens more joining it until the sound rolled across the property like distant thunder. Conversations faded. Heads turned. The security gates opened, and the first black commercial truck came around the curve, polished so clean the glass building reflected across its doors. Behind it came another, then another, all moving in perfect formation. 60 vehicles stretched down the drive, identical except for their unit numbers. On every door, painted in silver and red, was the same logo. Redwood Fleet Systems. My company logo. Lauren's smile disappeared before the first truck reached the plaza. Bradley lowered his glass. The lead vehicle stopped 20 feet from my old Ford, and Elena Brooks stepped down from the driver's side, carrying a black inspection folder. She walked past Hawthorne's executives, past Victoria Shaw, past Bradley, and stopped directly in front of me. 60 units, she said. Built to your specifications, Mr. Mercer. The final inspection is ready whenever you are. No one laughed this time. I could hear the soft ticking of my old truck's cooling engine and the low idle of 60 new ones behind it. Lauren stared at the Redwood logo, then at Elena, then finally at me, as if she were trying to rearrange everything she thought she knew before anyone noticed it had fallen apart. I held her gaze and remembered what she had asked me less than a minute earlier. You wanted me to park out back? I said calmly. Should I tell my fleet to do the same? Her lips parted, but no words came. Bradley's face lost its color. Victoria took one slow step forward. And standing there between the truck my father helped me rebuild and the fleet that had taken me 23 years to create, I understood something Lauren was only beginning to learn. I had never hidden who I was. She had simply stopped looking. 3 hours earlier, the day had begun with Lauren standing in our bedroom doorway, staring past me at the old Ford in the driveway, as though it had personally offended her. Morning sunlight slipped through the blinds and drew pale lines across the carpet. Her navy dress was laid across the bed, perfectly pressed, beside a cream-colored jacket and a pair of shoes she had bought specifically for the Hawthorne event. Everything about her had been planned down to the smallest detail. Her hair appointment had been scheduled 2 weeks earlier. Her presentation had been rehearsed until she could deliver every number without looking at a screen. Even the silver earrings she chose had been selected because Victoria Shaw once mentioned liking simple jewelry. Then there was my truck, faded blue paint, worn leather seats, rust around the wheel wells, sitting in the driveway like the one thing she could not control. "Please tell me you are not driving that today," she said. I was buttoning a clean white shirt in front of the mirror. "It still runs." "That is not what I asked." Her voice carried the careful patience people use when they believe they are explaining something obvious. She walked to the window and folded her arms. "The entire executive team will be there. Corporate communications will be taking photographs. There will be investors, vendors, and members of the board. You cannot arrive looking like you just came from a repair shop." I looked at her reflection in the mirror. I own a repair shop. That was not the whole truth, but it was the part she had chosen to remember. Redwood had started as a 2-bay garage outside Fort Worth. Even after the company expanded into fleet engineering, logistics software, and commercial manufacturing, I kept the original property. Some mornings I still worked there with the doors open and the radio low, because the smell of rubber, coffee, and machine oil reminded me of my father. Lauren knew that much. She simply treated it like an embarrassing hobby. "You know what I mean," she said. "Rent something for the day? A Cadillac, a Lincoln, anything that does not look like it survived 3 recessions." I slid my watch over my wrist. It was an old stainless steel model Walter had given me when I turned 25. The face was scratched, but it kept perfect time. "The truck is fine." Lauren let out a slow breath and looked toward the ceiling. "Today is not the day for one of your sentimental performances." The words settled between us. Quiet, clean, colder than they needed to be. I could have told her that the Ford had carried my father and me to our first commercial service call during an ice storm. I could have told her that we had slept inside it behind a warehouse because we could not afford a motel. I could have told her that the dent on the driver's side door came from the night Walter lost his balance while loading our first generator, then laughed for 10 minutes because the truck looked more like a working man afterward. But Lauren had heard pieces of those stories before. Over the years, she had stopped listening before I reached the end. "It is a vehicle," she continued, "not a family member." I finished buttoning my cuff. Sometimes an object carries more history than the people looking at it understand. She picked up her earrings and fastened them in the mirror. "That sounds exactly like something you would say before making me explain you to my coworkers." I watched her apply a final touch of lipstick, then close the tube with a soft click. There had been a time when she liked that I did not care about appearances. When we first met, she called my simplicity honest. We used to eat burgers in that truck with the windows down, parked near Lake Worth while she talked about building a career that mattered. Back then, she would rest her shoes on the dashboard and laugh whenever the radio lost its signal. She once told me she would rather share a small life with someone real than a large one built for strangers. 16 years later, she had become more comfortable with strangers than with the man standing 10 feet away. "I will meet you there," she said, picking up her leather bag. "I need to arrive early." "I know." "And Daniel, use the side parking area. The front section is reserved for executives and invited partners." I almost smiled at that. Invited partners. The phrase had appeared twice in the formal agenda sitting inside my briefcase. My attorneys had reviewed the event schedule because Redwood Fleet Systems was not merely attending. We were the company providing the 60 new vehicles Hawthorne planned to unveil. The final acceptance documents still required my authorization. Lauren had discussed the project for 9 months without realizing the signature at the bottom belonged to her husband. I had never lied when she asked about work. She had simply stopped asking questions that required more than a short answer. "I will find a place to park," I said. She studied me for a moment, perhaps waiting for surrender. When it did not come, she shook her head. Do not make today difficult. Then she walked out, leaving behind the faint scent of perfume and the sharper feeling that I had already disappointed her simply by remaining myself. 15 minutes later, I stepped into the garage and opened the Ford's door. The hinges gave their familiar low creak. I placed my briefcase on the passenger seat beside the worn patch where my father used to rest his hand. The engine turned once, then came alive with the steady rumble I had trusted for nearly 3 decades. As I backed into the morning light, I saw Lauren's luxury sedan disappear at the end of the street. She was heading toward the most important event of her career. I was heading toward the same building carrying the final decision on a $48 million contract. Only one of us understood what that day was really about. The drive from our house to Hawthorne Industrial Group took 42 minutes when traffic moved well, and that morning every light seemed to turn green before I reached it. The Ford settled into its usual rhythm at 65 miles per hour, the steering wheel vibrating gently beneath my hands. Sunlight moved across the cracked dashboard, catching the small brass plate my father had fastened above the glove compartment more than 20 years earlier. It carried 3 words he believed explained nearly everything worth building. Do it right. I ran my thumb across the worn edge of the wheel and watched the city rise ahead of me. Glass towers replacing warehouses, polished signs replacing hand-painted ones. Hawthorne's headquarters stood north of downtown on 30 acres of landscaped property, a 12-story monument of steel, limestone, and blue glass. The entrance road curved past a reflecting pond before widening into a circular plaza designed to make every arrival feel important. By the time I reached the security gate, a line of luxury vehicles had already formed. Black Cadillacs, white Range Rovers, a silver Mercedes with temporary tags. Each one moved forward like it knew someone was watching. The guard checked the list on his tablet, then looked through my open window. His eyes moved from my shirt to the worn bench seat, then back to the screen. Name, sir. Daniel Mercer. His finger stopped. For half a second, his posture changed. He glanced toward the administration building as though someone had given him instructions he did not fully understand. Yes, Mr. Mercer. You may proceed to the main plaza. I was told the side lot might be better. He looked at the truck again, then lowered his voice. The note here says main entrance. That told me Elena had already spoken with security. I thanked him and drove on. Hawthorne flags lined the final quarter mile, snapping. In the Texas breeze. Beyond them, temporary banners announced the fleet modernization program in bold silver letters. Employees in matching blue shirts guided guests toward reserved spaces. A photographer moved between arriving executives, catching handshakes and practiced smiles. When I turned into the plaza, conversation did not stop, but it changed. Heads tilted. Eyes followed the Ford. One valet stepped forward, hesitated, then looked toward another employee for help. I saved him the trouble and parked along the front row between a spotless Lincoln Navigator and a dark blue Porsche. The Ford suspension creaked when I stepped down. Its door closed with a solid metal sound that belonged to another era. I took my briefcase from the passenger seat and paused beside the truck. The morning air smelled of fresh-cut grass, hot pavement, and expensive cologne drifting from the crowd near the entrance. I had spent most of my life around people who judged machinery by what it could carry, how long it could run, and whether it brought everyone home safely. The people standing outside Hawthorne seemed to judge it by the reflection in the paint. Lauren saw me almost immediately. She was speaking with Victoria Shaw and 3 members of the executive committee when her gaze moved past them and landed on the Ford. Her smile remained in place, but her shoulders tightened. She excused herself and crossed the plaza quickly, heels clicking against the stone. You parked here, she said when she reached me. It was not a question. Security directed me here. Then security made a mistake. She glanced toward the photographer. The side lot is behind the west wing. I know where it is. Daniel, this is exactly what I asked you not to do. Her voice stayed low, but embarrassment sharpened every word. You are acting as though I drove through the lobby. You know how this looks. I looked at the old Ford, then at the building reflected unevenly in its faded paint. It looks like a truck. She closed her eyes for a moment. Please do not make jokes. Not today. Before I could answer, a man in a charcoal suit approached with a champagne glass in one hand and confidence in every step. I recognized Bradley Knox from company photographs Lauren had shown me. Hawthorne's vice president of operations. He had been one of the strongest voices behind the fleet project, and according to the report inside my briefcase, one of the reasons the final contract remained unsigned. "Lauren," he called, smiling as he looked me over. "You must introduce us." She turned toward him with a brightness she had not shown me all morning. "Bradley, this is my husband, Daniel." Bradley offered his hand. His grip was firm, his expression friendly enough to pass from a distance. "Good to meet you. Lauren says you work with vehicles. I have spent some time around them." He glanced over my shoulder at the Ford. "I can see that." Two other executives joined us, drawn by the easy promise of entertainment. Bradley walked around the front of the truck, studying the rust near the bumper as if it were part of an exhibit. "This thing still road legal?" he asked. "It passed inspection last month." "Impressive. I thought the state gave up inspecting antiques." The others smiled. Lauren looked toward the entrance, pretending to check whether Victoria needed her. I watched her face, waiting for the smallest sign that she understood what Bradley was doing. Instead, she gave a soft laugh. It lasted barely a second. That was enough. Bradley heard permission in it. The executives heard permission in it. And I heard something else entirely. I heard the distance between the woman who once shared French fries with me in that truck and the woman standing beside me now, hoping no one believed she belonged to the man who drove it. Lauren's laugh was quiet enough that anyone else might have missed it, but marriage trains you to hear the smallest changes in the person beside you. I heard the hesitation she did not have. I heard the embarrassment she tried to hide. Most of all, I heard how easily she had chosen their approval over my dignity. Bradley kept talking, but his words faded beneath memories I had spent years refusing to examine. 16 years earlier, Lauren had climbed into that same Ford wearing jeans, a University of Texas sweatshirt, and a smile that made the cracked dashboard feel like the front row of a theater. We had been dating for 4 months. I was 30, working 14-hour days with my father, and she was finishing a graduate program while answering phones at a real estate office. Neither of us had much money. Most Friday nights, we split a burger and a large order of fries from a roadside diner, then parked near Lake Worth and watched the lights move across the water. The Ford had no working air conditioning back then. In July, we drove with both windows down and napkins pressed beneath our drinks because the cup holders leaned to one side. Lauren loved it. At least, I believe she did. She would kick off her shoes, rest her feet near the glove compartment, and talk about the life she wanted to build. Not the house, not the salary, the work. She wanted to become someone people trusted when the decisions became difficult. I wanted to build a company that treated mechanics, drivers, engineers, and customers like their names mattered. She once traced a finger across the brass plate my father had installed and read the words aloud. "Do it right," she said. "That sounds like you." I asked whether that was a compliment. She leaned against my shoulder and said, "It is the reason I trust you." I carried that sentence for years. Through our first apartment with the unreliable heater. Through the months when Redwood had 6 employees and more debt than revenue. Through every dinner I missed because a delivery truck had failed 60 miles from the nearest service station. Lauren knew what the early years cost. She sat at our kitchen table while I reviewed invoices under a hanging light that flickered whenever the washing machine ran. She brought coffee to the garage at midnight. She learned the names of my technicians and remembered which ones had children. When my father died, she rode beside me in the Ford all the way home from the hospital without saying anything. Her hand stayed over mine on the bench seat. For a long time, I believed that moment had joined us permanently. Then success arrived, not all at once, but in layers. Redwood secured a municipal service contract, then a regional distribution company, then a national retailer. Our 6 employees became 40. 40 became 200. We moved design operations into a modern facility outside Fort Worth. Lauren's career grew too. She joined Hawthorne as a procurement analyst and climbed faster than anyone expected. I was proud of her. I attended every promotion dinner, every fundraiser, every company holiday event she invited me to. At first, she introduced me with pride. "Daniel builds fleet systems," she would say. Later, it became, "Daniel works with trucks." A few years after that, she started calling me semi-retired, even though I worked more hours than ever. I noticed the change but treated it like weather. Temporary. Harmless. Something that would pass if I remained patient. She began choosing my clothes before corporate dinners. She replaced my work boots with shoes that pinched my feet. She asked me not to mention the garage because some executives might misunderstand. When colleagues visited our home, she steered conversations away from Redwood and toward her projects at Hawthorne. I told myself she wanted something that belonged only to her. I respected that. What I did not understand was that she had begun removing me from the picture entirely. The more important her title became, the less comfortable she seemed with anything that reminded people where we had started. The Ford became the clearest example. She stopped riding in it 6 years earlier. First, she said the seats bothered her back. Then she said it smelled like oil. Eventually, she said it did not fit the image expected of someone in her position. I never argued. I had another vehicle for meetings and longer trips. I kept the Ford because certain things should not be discarded simply because the world no longer finds them impressive. Standing in Hawthorne's plaza, watching Lauren laugh beside people who knew almost nothing about either of us, I realized the truck was not what embarrassed her. It was evidence. Evidence that before the polished office, the tailored jackets, and the executive photographs, she had once loved a man with grease beneath his fingernails and ambition that did not need an audience. Bradley raised his glass again and asked whether I restored old vehicles as a hobby. Before I could answer, Lauren said, "Daniel has always had trouble letting go." She smiled as though she were explaining a harmless flaw. I looked at her and understood that she was not talking about the Ford anymore. Neither was I. Bradley smiled as though Lauren had handed him another opening, but I was no longer listening to him. My hand rested against the Ford's front fender, and the cool metal pulled me backward through time to a winter morning when the truck had not yet become an embarrassment to anyone. It had belonged to my father before it belonged to me. Walter Mercer bought it used in 1999 with 112,000 miles on the odometer, a cracked taillight, and a heater that worked only when the engine felt generous. He paid cash from an envelope he kept behind a loose brick in the garage wall. At the time, Redwood was not a company. It was two men, a rented bay, a toolbox missing half its sockets, and a hand-painted sign that leaned whenever the wind came from the north. We repaired delivery vans, farm trucks, school maintenance vehicles, and anything else people trusted enough to bring us. My father believed a broken machine was usually less complicated than the person explaining what happened to it. He listened carefully, asked simple questions, and never promised a repair he could not finish. That truck carried every part we could afford and several we could not. We drove it across North Texas with brake drums in the bed, alternators on the floor, and invoices tucked beneath the sun visor. The suspension sagged. The radio worked when it rained. The passenger window needed both hands to roll up. I loved every imperfect inch of it. The winter that changed everything came during a hard freeze that shut down highways and left hundreds of businesses waiting on deliveries that could not reach them. A small grocery distributor called us before sunrise. 7 of their trucks had failed overnight, and if they could not move their refrigerated loads, several rural stores would have empty shelves by the weekend. They had already contacted larger service companies. Every one of them refused. Roads were too dangerous. Parts were too limited. The job was too small to justify the risk. My father listened to the owner for less than a minute, then looked at me and asked, "How many blankets do we have?" We loaded tools, batteries, belts, hoses, and 2 thermoses of coffee into the Ford. The temperature was 18 degrees when we left Fort Worth. Ice covered the overpasses, and the wind pushed across the highway hard enough to make the old truck drift within its lane. We drove 47 miles in 3 hours. Twice, we stopped to help stranded motorists. Once, we used a tow strap to pull a nurse's car away from a snowbank so she could reach a clinic. My father never mentioned the time. He only said, "If you can carry the weight, you carry it." We reached the distributor after noon and worked in an unheated loading bay until our hands were stiff beneath our gloves. By sunset, 4 trucks were running. By midnight, all 7 were ready. The owner stood beside us with tears in his eyes and offered to pay double. My father accepted the original amount and asked for one thing instead, a chance to bid on their maintenance work when the roads cleared. That handshake became Redwood's first fleet contract. The distributor expanded. They recommended us to 2 regional carriers. 2 became 6. 6 became 20. Years later, when Redwood had engineers, software teams, and service centers in 4 states, I still kept the original contract framed in my office. The Ford remained too. The dent on the driver's side door came from that same frozen night. My father slipped while unloading a generator and caught himself against the truck. The metal folded inward with a low pop. I rushed toward him, but he was laughing before I reached him. He brushed snow from his jacket and said the truck finally looked employed. I never repaired the dent. After he passed away, mechanics offered to restore the entire vehicle. New body panels, new paint, new interior. I replaced what safety required and left the rest untouched. The wear was not neglect. It was a record. Every scratch marked a road we had traveled. Every stain carried a day we had worked. Every worn place on the steering wheel held the shape of his hands. Lauren knew my father had owned the truck, but she never knew the whole story. She had heard the beginning once, years ago, then answered an email before I reached the frozen highway. I told myself I would explain it another time. Another time became another year. Eventually, the story remained between the truck and me. Bradley tapped the faded hood again and said, "I am surprised this thing made it through the gate." I looked at his finger resting on the metal that had carried Redwood's first tools, first contract, and first promise. "It has made it through worse," I said. Lauren gave me the look she used whenever she thought I was becoming too sentimental in public. "Daniel, nobody is questioning its history," she said. "We are only saying there is a time to move forward." I met her eyes. Moving forward is not the same as forgetting what carried you. For a moment, she had no answer. Then Bradley laughed softly and turned toward the entrance, certain the conversation belonged to him. He did not know that every vehicle scheduled to arrive that morning had been designed around a principle my father taught me from the seat of that old Ford. He did not know that the truck he saw as scrap had become the first testing platform for the system Hawthorne was preparing to celebrate. Most of all, he did not know that the man who built it all was standing 3 feet away, listening to him explain the value of progress. There was a reason Bradley Knox could stand beside my truck, look me in the eye, and have no idea who I was. Redwood Fleet Systems had grown large without ever turning me into its public face. That had been intentional. I founded the company, approved its largest investments, and still held controlling ownership through Mercer Industrial Holdings, but I avoided interviews, magazine profiles, and staged photographs beside polished equipment. Elena Brooks handled public operations. Marcus Hale represented us in major negotiations. Our regional presidents attended conferences and accepted awards. I remained where I had always been most useful, inside design reviews, service facilities, and testing bays where problems could not be solved with a speech. Some people assumed I had retired. Others believed Redwood belonged to a private investment group. I never corrected them unless the truth was necessary. My father used to say that a company should be recognized by the work it leaves behind, not by the size of the founder's portrait in the lobby. I built Redwood around that belief. Every new employee learned the same rule during orientation. Names mattered, titles had limits, and no executive was too important to listen to a driver who spent 10 hours a day behind the wheel. That culture protected us when growth came faster than expected. It also protected me. Money has a way of changing the temperature in a room. People laugh sooner. They agree faster. They remember your birthday after forgetting it for years. Once Redwood passed its first $100 million in annual revenue, distant relatives began calling with business ideas. Former classmates suddenly wanted lunch, and vendors treated ordinary suggestions like brilliant strategy. I learned to step out of the spotlight before praise became another form of noise. At home, I wanted to be Daniel, not Mr. Mercer. Not the founder of a company with service contracts across 4 states. Not the man whose approval could move millions of dollars before noon. Just Daniel, the husband who made coffee too strong, repaired loose cabinet hinges, and sometimes fell asleep in the recliner with a technical report open across his chest. I believed Lauren understood that. In the early years, she said she respected it. She told friends that I was the same man whether Redwood had a good quarter or a difficult one. When we bought our house, I placed the property in both our names, even though the down payment came through Mercer Industrial Holdings. When her mother needed help with medical bills, I covered them quietly. When Lauren wanted to pursue an executive program that cost more than some families earned in a year, I paid the tuition without asking her to explain the value. I never used those decisions as proof of importance. Marriage was not supposed to be a ledger. Somewhere along the way, silence created an empty space, and Lauren filled it with assumptions. Because I did not discuss quarterly earnings at dinner, she decided Redwood remained a small regional operation. Because I drove the old Ford, She assumed I had stepped away from serious business. Because Marcus and Elena attended formal meetings, she believed they owned the authority behind their titles. She did not know that I reviewed every major contract before it reached a client. She did not know that the fleet waiting 5 miles away had passed through 3 design revisions because I rejected the original braking telemetry. She did not know Hawthorne's proposed agreement had remained unsigned for 11 days because a compliance report raised concerns about Bradley's preferred maintenance vendor. I could have explained all of it. I could have placed financial statements on our kitchen table, opened the ownership records, and walked her through every layer of the company. But the truth was harder than missing paperwork. Lauren had stopped asking. Her questions became comments. Are you going to the garage again? Do you really need another meeting with Marcus? Why keep working when you could finally slow down? Each sentence closed a door before I could answer. I did not lie to her. I simply refused to force information into a conversation she no longer wanted to have. Maybe that was my mistake. Silence can preserve peace for a while, but it can also allow distance to become permanent. Standing in Hawthorne's plaza, I watched Bradley glance at his watch and complain that Redwood's delivery team was running late. He spoke about my company as if it were a contractor he could replace with a phone call. Lauren nodded and said she had worked too hard for the launch to be embarrassed by delays. I almost told her the vehicles were waiting for my authorization. Instead, I looked toward the highway beyond the trees. My phone rested inside my jacket pocket with one unread message from Elena. All 60 units ready. Awaiting your word. Bradley adjusted his cuffs and said, that is the problem with private companies. Nobody knows who is really in charge. I met his eyes and answered quietly. Sometimes the person in charge is closer than you think. He smiled because he believed I was making conversation. Lauren looked away because she believed I was trying to sound important. Neither of them understood that before the morning ended, the company they thought had no face was about to speak with mine. The $48 million agreement had been presented inside Hawthorne as a triumph long before anyone signed the final page. Lauren spoke about it at home as though the contract already belonged to her department. She described the projected savings, the improved delivery schedule, and the attention Victoria Shaw had received from the board. Every number sounded polished. Every promise sounded complete. What she did not mention was the maintenance company Bradley had inserted into the proposal 3 weeks before closing. Northline Service Partners appeared on paper as a regional support provider with competitive rates and rapid response coverage. The presentation made it look efficient. The compliance report made it look very different. Northline had been formed 18 months earlier. Its listed office was a suite above a dentist in Plano. It owned no major service facility, employed fewer than 12 technicians, and had never managed a fleet larger than 40 vehicles. Hawthorne wanted to assign it responsibility for 60 new units operating across 3 states. That alone would have delayed my approval. Then Marcus found the connection. Northline's majority owner was Bradley's brother-in-law, Stephen Knox. The relationship was not disclosed in the procurement documents. The proposed service rates were nearly 30% higher than Redwood's authorized regional partners. Additional fees had been buried under emergency response, equipment storage, and software coordination. Over 5 years, those charges could have moved several million dollars away from Hawthorne and into a company tied directly to the man recommending it. I learned about the issue 11 days before the launch. Elena called me at 7 in the morning while I was standing in the original Redwood garage, rebuilding a steering assembly from one of our test vehicles. Her voice was calm, but I knew her well enough to hear concern beneath it. Daniel, we have a vendor disclosure problem. She sent the files while we spoke. I wiped my hands, opened the report on an old office computer, and read every page twice. Bradley's name appeared beside the recommendation. Lauren's signature appeared on the preliminary approval. I stared at it longer than I should have. Her handwriting was unmistakable, neat and slightly tilted, the same signature she used on birthday cards, mortgage papers, and the marriage license framed in a drawer at home. I wanted to believe she had missed the relationship. Large projects create mountains of documents. Good people overlook details when deadlines tighten. But Lauren was not careless. She built her career by finding what other people missed. That was why her approval troubled me. I asked Marcus to investigate without contacting Hawthorne. Within 48 hours, he confirmed that Bradley had pushed Northline into the agreement after Redwood and Hawthorne had already settled on qualified providers. Internal emails showed procurement staff raising questions. Those questions disappeared from the final summary. One message from a junior analyst asked whether the family connection required disclosure. Bradley answered that the relationship was irrelevant because Stephen was only an extended relative. Lauren received a copy. She did not respond. 3 days later, her signature appeared on the revised vendor list. I said nothing at home, not because I wanted to trap her, but because I needed to understand whether she had made a mistake, followed an order, or chosen ambition over judgment. The launch offered a final opportunity to watch how Hawthorne's leadership behaved when no one believed the owner of Redwood was present. That was why I drove the Ford. That was why I arrived without Elena or Marcus beside me. Contracts reveal numbers. Unscripted moments reveal character. Standing in the plaza, I watched Bradley move through the executives as though the building belonged to him. He interrupted junior employees, corrected people who had not made mistakes, and accepted praise for specifications developed by Redwood engineers. Lauren stayed near him, translating his confidence into something that looked respectable. When Victoria approached, Bradley described the new fleet as the result of his personal leadership. Lauren smiled and thanked him for trusting her team. Neither mentioned the analysts who had spent months reviewing service routes. Neither mentioned the mechanics who had tested the vehicles through Texas heat and Colorado snow. People who carry the weight are often missing from the photograph. My phone vibrated once inside my jacket. Marcus had sent a final update. Northline ownership confirmed. Documentation complete. Recommend holding execution. I locked the screen before anyone could see it. Bradley looked toward the empty driveway and frowned. "Where are those trucks?" he asked. Lauren checked the time. They were scheduled 10 minutes ago. He gave her a cold look. "This launch has the board's attention. Do not let Redwood make us look unprepared." She nodded quickly, then turned toward me as though my presence had become another problem she needed to manage. "Daniel, could you please move the Ford now? We need the front row clear." I studied her face, searching for any sign that the woman I married still recognized the difference between pressure and surrender. "Before I do," I said, "tell me something. Did you personally review the maintenance vendors on this contract?" The color in her expression shifted, subtle but immediate. Bradley stopped smiling. Lauren glanced toward him, then back at me. "Why would you ask that?" "Because details matter." Her jaw tightened. "This is not the time to discuss my work." Bradley stepped closer and gave a short laugh. "No offense, Daniel, but procurement at this level is probably more complicated than fixing an old pickup." I held his gaze. "You would be surprised how similar they are. When something does not belong, it usually leaves a trace." For the first time that morning, Bradley did not have an answer ready. Beyond the trees, 60 engines waited for my word, and inside my briefcase, one unsigned contract waited with them. Lauren held my gaze for half a second, then looked toward the executives gathering near the entrance. The event staff had begun arranging. People beneath the Hawthorne banner, and the photographer was asking department leaders to move closer together. Everything around her was prepared for celebration. Only my question did not fit. "I reviewed what my team placed in front of me," she said. Her answer was smooth, but not complete. "That was not what I asked." Bradley shifted his champagne glass from one hand to the other. "Daniel, this is a corporate launch, not a family conversation." His smile returned, thinner than before. Lauren does not need to explain procurement procedures to someone who changes oil for a living. A few executives nearby heard him. One looked down at his phone. Another pretended to study the banner. Nobody laughed this time, but nobody corrected him either. Silence can be a form of agreement when people are afraid of choosing a side. I looked at Lauren. "Is that what you told them I do?" She adjusted the strap of her leather bag. "I told them you work with vehicles. That leaves out quite a bit." "Daniel, please." Her voice dropped lower. "You are making this uncomfortable." I almost admired the sentence. She had turned my humiliation into my failure to behave. For years, I had mistaken that kind of control for patience. She would narrow the conversation until only her version fit inside it, then act surprised when I stopped speaking. That morning, I did not stop. I asked about the vendors because one of them does not belong in the agreement. Bradley's face tightened. Lauren glanced toward him again, and that small movement answered more than her words had. She knew enough to be worried. "You have not seen the agreement," she said. "Are you certain?" The question landed softly. Her eyes changed. Not recognition yet. Something closer to uncertainty. She studied my shirt, my watch, and the briefcase beside the Ford, as though those ordinary things might suddenly explain why I sounded so calm. Bradley stepped between us without fully blocking my view. "Let us keep this simple," he said. "The professionals handling this contract have approved the vendors. Your concern is noted. My concern does not need to be noted." I looked past him at Lauren. "It needs to be answered." The breeze shifted across the plaza, lifting the edge of the banner above the doors. Somewhere near the loading area, a forklift sounded and then went quiet. Lauren pressed her lips together. I could see the calculation behind her eyes. If she defended me, Bradley might question her loyalty. If she dismissed me, the executives would see her as decisive. She had spent years learning how to read rooms like this one. The painful part was realizing she no longer read me at all. "Northline met the requirements presented to us," she said at last. "The decision was reviewed. Did you know who owned it?" Her expression went still. Bradley answered before she could. "This is inappropriate. It is a simple question. It is confidential. Ownership records are public." His jaw shifted. "You are out of your depth." I looked at the Ford, then back at him. People say that when they are hoping, nobody checks the water. Victoria Shaw had moved closer. She stood 10 feet away now, listening without interrupting. 2 board members joined her. The photographer lowered his camera. The atmosphere changed by degrees, like pressure building before a storm no forecast had mentioned. Lauren noticed. She turned toward me and spoke through a careful smile. "Enough. Move the truck to the west lot, and we can discuss this at home." There it was again. Not an answer. An instruction. One final chance to become smaller so her day could remain polished. I placed my briefcase on the Ford's hood and rested both hands beside it. "Does this truck embarrass you?" Her eyes widened slightly. "Do not do this here. I am asking here because this is where you chose to laugh." The executives did not move. Bradley looked annoyed, but Lauren looked exposed. For once, there was no private room where she could reshape the moment later. She glanced at the rust around the wheel well, and then at the line of luxury vehicles along the plaza. "It does not belong at an event like this," she said. "Why?" "Because appearances matter. More than history. This is business, Daniel." Her voice sharpened. "People are expected to move forward." I waited. She could have stopped there. She could have looked at me and remembered the man who had carried boxes into our first apartment, paid her tuition without mentioning it again, and sat beside her mother through every difficult hospital appointment. Instead, she looked at the Ford with open frustration. That truck reminds people that not everyone moves forward. The words crossed the space between us and settled deeper than Bradley's jokes ever could. He had known me for minutes. Lauren had known me for 16 years. That was the difference. I reached into my jacket and took out my phone. Elena's message still waited on the screen. "All 60 units ready. Awaiting your word." I typed 5 words and pressed send. "Bring them through the main entrance." Then I slipped the phone back into my pocket. Bradley gave a short, satisfied laugh, believing Lauren had ended the argument. "Good," he said. "Now that we have settled that, perhaps someone can call Redwood and find out why our fleet is late." I looked toward the driveway beyond the trees. "They are not late." Lauren followed my gaze. "Then where are they?" At first, there was only wind moving through the flags. Then a low engine note rose beyond the curve. Another joined it. Then another. Within seconds, the sound became too large to ignore. Conversations stopped across the plaza. Security officers turned toward the gate. Victoria stepped forward. Lauren's expression tightened as sunlight flashed across the first windshield approaching through the trees. I kept my hand on the faded hood beside me. "They were waiting," I said. Bradley frowned. "Waiting for what?" The lead vehicle came into view, black paint shining beneath the Texas sun, a silver and red emblem covering the driver's side door. I watched the color leave his smile. For me, the first truck rolled into the plaza with its headlights on, moving slowly enough for every person near the entrance to see the Redwood emblem centered across the door. A second vehicle followed 12 feet behind it, then a third, each one identical in black and silver, each one carrying a unit number beneath the company logo. The line continued around the curve until the driveway seemed to belong to Redwood. 60 engines settled into a deep, synchronized rhythm that traveled through the stone beneath our feet. The executives who had been laughing minutes earlier stood in silence, their champagne glasses lowered, their prepared conversations forgotten. Bradley stared at the approaching fleet as if the vehicles had arrived from somewhere outside the plan he believed he controlled. Lauren looked at me, then at the trucks, then back at me again. Her face was searching for an explanation that would allow the morning to return to normal. There was none. The lead truck stopped beside the presentation platform, exactly 20 feet from my Ford. Its engine went quiet. The remaining vehicles came to a precise stop behind it, forming two clean rows across the plaza. Driver doors opened almost together. Redwood technicians stepped out wearing charcoal uniforms with silver lettering over the left chest. No one rushed. No one needed to. Their order said more than any announcement could have. Elena Brooks climbed down from the lead vehicle carrying a black inspection folder. She wore a dark suit beneath a Redwood safety vest, her hair pulled back, her expression calm. I had worked with Elena for 14 years. She had started as a service coordinator in a small office with a leaking ceiling and had become the most capable operations leader I had ever known. She understood engines, contracts, people, and the difference between authority and performance. As she crossed the plaza, several Hawthorne executives moved toward her. She passed them without slowing. Victoria Shaw extended a hand, but Elena gave her a respectful nod and continued walking until she stood directly in front of me. The silence became complete. Even the event photographer lowered his camera for a second, uncertain whether the moment belonged in the planned program. Elena opened the folder and held it toward me. 60 units, she said. All systems cleared. Final inspection is ready, Mr. Mercer. Lauren inhaled sharply. Bradley looked from Elena to me. Mr. Mercer, he repeated. Elena turned toward him. Daniel Mercer, founder and controlling owner of Redwood Fleet Systems. The words did not need emphasis. They moved through the crowd on their own. A board member near Victoria whispered something I could not hear. One of the procurement directors stared at Lauren. The photographer raised his camera again, and this time the lens pointed at me. Bradley forced a laugh that sounded smaller than the others had. There must be some misunderstanding. There is not, Elena said. I took the folder from her and reviewed the first page even though I already knew every line. Vehicle numbers, safety certifications, software integration status, delivery mileage. Each unit had traveled less than 30 miles from the staging facility. Each one represented thousands of hours of work by people Bradley had never bothered to learn about. Lauren stepped closer. Daniel, what is this? Her voice had lost the polish she used around executives. It is the fleet Hawthorne ordered. I know what it is. I mean you. Why is she calling you the owner? Because I am. She shook her head slowly. Redwood is owned by Mercer Industrial Holdings. Yes. The meaning reached her before I explained it. Mercer was not an accidental name buried in corporate paperwork. It was mine. You own the holding company, she said. I control it. Bradley looked toward Victoria. Why was this not disclosed during negotiations? It was, Elena answered. Ownership documents were included in the legal package provided to Hawthorne. Your outside counsel reviewed them 6 weeks ago. Victoria's expression hardened, not at me, but at the people responsible for briefing her. I was told Redwood's owner would not attend. I usually do not, I said. Today seemed worth attending. My eyes moved toward Lauren. She understood the reason. The Ford stood beside us, its faded paint reflecting the black body of the lead truck. Old steel beside new technology. The beginning beside everything that followed. Bradley glanced at the rows of vehicles, then at my shirt and worn watch, still trying to reconcile value with appearance. So this was some kind of performance? He asked. No, the performance was already happening when I arrived. His face tightened. Lauren lowered her voice. You let me believe Redwood was a small company. I told you what I did. You stopped asking what it had become. You should have told me. You should have wanted to know. That answer struck harder than anger would have. She looked away first. Victoria stepped forward and offered her hand. Mr. Mercer, I believe we need a private conversation before the ceremony begins. I shook her hand once. We do. Bradley straightened, trying to recover the posture he had carried all morning. The contract has already been approved. We can handle internal questions after the launch. I opened the folder, removed the unsigned execution page, and held it where he could see the empty signature line. The contract has not been approved, I said. The vehicles arrived for inspection. Ownership transfers only after I sign. His eyes fixed on the blank line. Behind him, 60 new trucks waited in perfect formation. Beside me, The old Ford remained exactly where Lauren had asked me not to park it. For the first time that morning, everyone understood which vehicle had brought the person with the final decision.